Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Okay, let's welcome our first speaker for tonight, Mike.
Good evening. My name is Mike, and I'm an alcoholic. It's good to be here. It's always good to be in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you. Got one. So just give you a little bit about myself. My sobriety date is March 27th, 1996. My home group is 52 from the Big Blue in Palos Verdes. And I have a sponsor today that I check in with on a regular basis, and his name is Pat. To go back a little bit, I probably started drinking when I was about 14. Prior to that, you know, I never fit in. I never felt like I fit in. I didn't even feel like a part of my own family. I just always felt like that fifth wheel. You know, I just never seemed to be able to jive. You know, it was like I was constantly, my dad was always trying to send me to therapists. It always felt like they were poking and prodding me, like, what's wrong with you? You know, what the hell's wrong with you? You know, I mean, I managed to fail at just about everything I did in life, including the 4th grade, you know. And they would test me, and they'd say, he tests high, he tests well, we just don't understand. But it was just, you know, I only wanted to do what I wanted to do, and that didn't include homework and study and things like that, and, you know, and it didn't include, you know, taking care of business or doing anything I was supposed to do. And, and I just went through life feeling different. Like I said, I started drinking probably by the time I was 14, and man, I got drunk, and it wasn't like, wow, or anything like that. It was more all of a sudden I realized that, man, none of that stuff was bothering me anymore. None of those people were bothering me, and I didn't care. We got stopped by the cops. I didn't care. They threatened to take me home. I said, fine. You know, I didn't care. It was like, man, this is great. This is what I've been trying to feel like all my life. You know, drugs is part of my story. Because at that age, I was trying a lot of different things, everything from hallucinogenics to speed and cocaine and all kinds of stuff. And by the time I was 15, I was in my first rehab. You know, I'd take off from home, and disappear for 2-3 days at a time, sometimes a week. And this one particular time, I had disappeared for about 10 days, and I was on a run with some of that other stuff. And I came home, and the only reason I came home was I was looking for something that I could sell. And get some more money so I could keep going. And of course, my dad was waiting for me. Sneaky bastard snuck and hid the car around the corner and was in the house waiting for me. And so I walked in the house, and it was like, oh. And he just said he couldn't do it anymore, and he was sick of me, and he called the cops on his own son. Can you imagine that? And, and they took me away to this, like, halfway house for kids, and they let me dry out for about 3 days. And then they came back, a cop and a social worker came back to see me, and they said, well, you got a choice. You can either do juvenile hall for 4 months, or you can do this 45-day rehab program. It only took me about a split second to do the math on that one. I was like, 45 days for, I'll take the 45-day program. And, and because my dad's insurance would have covered it at that time. And I went into this program. And like I said, I was about 15 years old at this time, and this is my first experience with Alcoholics Anonymous, and and sobriety, and it was a good program. They had counselors in this place, and they had meetings and psychiatrists and therapists and all that stuff, and and it was a great program. I mean, they sit the chair in front of you. That's your mom. Tell your mom what you think of her, and you cuss the chair out, kind of stuff, and that kind of thing. And I went through this program, and graduated. I don't remember if I got a certificate or not. I don't remember, but they suggested that when you get out, go to AA meetings, get a sponsor, do all that kind of stuff. And I walked out of that place thinking I had this thing lit. this time, I got it together. I can do this. And I walked out of that rehab program, and I even started going to some AA meetings and other youth program meetings and things like that, and but never got a sponsor, never worked any steps. I figured I didn't need all those things. After all, I went through the academy, so I didn't need all this stuff. And I got out, and like I said, I started going to meetings, but it was more of a social hour more than anything else, and I would show up, and I'd drink coffee and then leave early to go save a seat over at the Caro's restaurant where we'd all go for coffee afterwards. Then I'd show up late, and sometimes I would show up at the meeting, and I wouldn't even go in the meeting. I'd be hanging around outside smoking cigarettes and hanging out and doing anything but participating. And, I stayed dry for 11 months like that. And one night I went out, and I got drunk, and nothing bad happened. It was actually a pretty good night. I had some fun. And I came back the next day, and it didn't count. Nothing bad happened, and I had fun. So a month later, I took a cake for a year. And then 2 months after that, I was off and running again. And it was going to be 12 more years before I saw another room of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it went from bad to worse real quick. When I went back out, my dad said enough. He threw me out within 6 months. Friends will only put up with you for a couple of weeks. It's like you can only darken their couch for a couple of days before it's like, you got to go. And so pretty soon, within a few months, I was, living on the streets. And I was staying at bus stations and all-night diners if I had managed to get enough money to get a cup of coffee to justify the booth for the night. And that's how I lived my life for 6 months. And what ended up happening was I ended up with 103-degree temperature, strep throat, pneumonia, and I weighed about 119 pounds with, wet with rocks in my pocket. And I was physically dying on the streets, and some friends, a friend that I knew from high school, he and his mom came and bailed me up off the streets, and they took me in. And I remember at that point, and I was about 17 by this time, and I remember at that point I was thinking, boy, these drugs are real bad. I got to quit these drugs. This stuff is killing me. If you just stick with alcohol, you'll be okay. That's exactly what my mind told me. And besides, it's legal. Not for you, but it's legal. I mean, I was 17. It wasn't quite legal for me, but eventually I'd get there. I could catch up, And so I figured if I just did that for a while, I'd be okay. Like I said, I did a lot of other stuff for a while. I tried pot, but, all that seemed to do was make me paranoid, and I didn't need any synthetic help being paranoid. I was paranoid sober enough as it was, but alcohol seemed to just take care of that just fine. And so I cleaned up a little bit and put on a few pounds. I probably ate for the next couple of weeks, and then it was like, what the hell am I going to do with my life? I had dropped out of high school. I wasn't going anywhere. And so I figured, well, maybe if I enlist, and I figured, here's a good idea, a nice little, I could change of atmosphere. I could enlist and go into the service. I went into the service. Took the test, passed the test, and they say you have to score higher. You don't have a high school diploma, so I took the test and I passed, and they accepted me, much to their chagrin. And drinking was fun for a while. I had a lot of fun, and there wasn't a lot of consequences. I mean, occasionally I'd have to, go stand in front of the captain or something like that for something I did, or some bohemian night or something like that, and I ended up, getting out of the Army, somehow scraping out of there, and I got out with the honorable discharge, and they were starting to figure out who I was, so I figured I wouldn't re-enlist. I would just go ahead and get out, and I got out, and I figured I just needed a new plan. Maybe if I went back to school, so I got out and I started going back to school. I signed up at the community college here in Pasadena, out in Pasadena, and I started going to school, and that lasted all of about 2 or 3 weeks. And then I was just getting up and going in the mornings and going to the liquor store and getting a bottle of something and maybe a 40-ounce or a 12-pack and going home and drinking all day. And this went on for a couple of years. The same people who had bailed me off the streets were nice enough to let me move back in with them till I could get on my feet. And, so I darkened their couch for 2 years, trying to sober up by 5 o'clock when they got home. It was like, and that was my life. It was rather pathetic. So they gave me the ultimatum, you either got to, dry up or get out. And of course, all I heard was get out, because the dry up part just wasn't going to apply. You know, so I figured what I need a new plan is maybe if I got a job, I could get a little job and, you know, I start doing some work and then I can, you know, get my own place. You know, and I did that. And, you know, what I ended up doing was I got a job in security. You know, I figured I could put on a uniform and stand in front of a door. I learned how to do that in the Army. And so that's what I did. And, you know, and I got this job and I promoted well because I could show up and put on a uniform and stand in front of a door. And, you know, and I was doing that for a couple of years and I managed to get me one of those little luxury studio apartments over in Hawthorne off 135th and Doty. You know, $4.95 a month, utilities included. Not bad. And my drinking was just now by this time it's just isolated drinking. I'm getting off work at 2 o'clock. I'm on the way home. I'm stopping at the liquor store, and I'd pick up a 12-pack and a bottle of something. And I'd go home. And by 2:15, well, about 2:30, I'd be drinking. I would pass out about 9 o'clock. Never really went to sleep. It had one of those hide-a-beds that fold out, but I never pulled that thing out. I'd just pass out on the couch, and the bed never made it down. I don't even remember if it had sheets on it or anything. And I just slept on this couch I had in front of the TV, and that was my life. And this went on for a couple more years. And what ended up happening was I wasn't keeping up with my responsibilities. I was isolating. I was totally alone. A couple of friends, would, try to, friends. They were more like coworkers because they just happened to be in my world. But, they were concerned, and they were just like, you need to, you need to do something, and I mean, there was just stupid things going on. I mean, I was behind in payments on the truck. I was, I was constantly, behind in payment on the rent. It was only $495, and I couldn't even do that. I had credit cards maxed out. They'd give me another credit card, and I'd go run that one up, and and I was just completely everything was falling apart. It was a house of cards. I was trying to hold it all together, hold it all up, and I just couldn't seem to keep it together. And a friend of mine said, well, you need to, get out, go somewhere, think, I mean, so, and of course I mistook think for drink, and ended up at this bar watching a Monday night football game. And, the guy said, well, I got to go to work in the morning. And, and I was always pretty good about that. I'd start drinking around 2:30. I'd pass out by 9. So I'd come to, with the alarm going off around 4:30 and be able to make it back to work. So I figured, well, when the game's over, I'm going to go home. And what would happen is the game would, the game goes over, and I'm like, well, just one more for the road, and then I'll go, and then I'll go. And it would be like, well, another one. Well, give me a Long Island iced tea and a beer back. And then pretty soon it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and then next thing you know, they're saying last call. And the only thing that seems to get me off that bar stool is the thought that they're going to be locking up those liquor cabinets pretty soon. I got to get out of here if I'm going to get another bottle, So, off I go, backing out in the parking lot. I hit a parked car. Somebody says, accident in the parking lot, call the police. Next thing you know, there's like 2 fire trucks, 2 sheriffs, a highway patrol for this fender bender in the parking lot. And one more time, it's 11 a.m. in the morning, and I'm standing out in front of the Lenox County Jail Station with my shoelaces in one hand and my wallet in the other, my car in Englewood, and home over in Hawthorne, and a quarter in my pocket. So I'm doing that shuffle, like calling the cab. Hey, if you take me to the ATM machine, I can pay you, and then we got to go over here. And, it was just a whole fiasco. I ended up getting home, and, sometime about midday, I unplugged the phone, drew the drapes, turned on the TV just to have some noise. I laid on the couch because I hadn't slept all night, And, I said, something's got to change. I can't keep going on like this. Here I am. I'm 27 years old, and I'm no further along than I was when I was 18 or 17, and my life's got to get different. It's got to change. Something I got to stop, knock off this drinking. I can't keep doing this. Within about 3 days, I'm going, never's awfully extreme. I can still have a drink every now and then. And of course, that was on November 6th of 1995. And December 6th, I had to go to court, and then pretty soon they sent me to that DUI school. And, I got assigned, and I had to go to the DUI school, and I got to the DUI school, and I remember they said, this is a 13-week course. You can't drink during these 13 weeks and while you're in this program, and you got to be at these meetings every week. And of course, at that time, I'm like, look, I don't want any trouble. I got a big fine. I got to know I got to do this thing. I just want to put this behind me. No problem. I won't do it. On the drive home, I'm sitting there, I'm going, I'm a grown-ass man. They can't tell me when not to drink. I just won't drink on Tuesday nights when I got to go to this meeting. And then within, of course, and then pretty soon after about the first night, it was like, well, I just won't drink before I go to the meeting on Tuesdays. I'll get something on the way home. And then within about 6 weeks, I can't even do that. I'm driving home from work, and I know I'm going to drink, and I don't have any willpower against it, and I'm calling them up with some lame excuse about being sick because I can't even make it one night without a drink. And I have no reasonable explanation for myself. I went to one AA meeting and got that court card signed once, and I hadn't been back for a while. And then I ended up going back into the AA meeting because, of course, I was running out of time and I still had to get this thing signed. And I show up in there, and I didn't get into Alcoholics Anonymous and, yes, these are my people, I am home, It was more like, so this is what my life's come to. I got to come here and hang out with you people. I thought it was the end of the world. And I sat in there and I got a court card, I got it signed and, and I went to a couple of meetings and, like I said, that was, that's closer to the end of the year. And of course, I didn't get sober till March 27th. So there was a lot of in and out, a couple of days, drink again, week, drink again, so on and so on. I got to speed it up. But what ended up happening was, by the grace of God, I dried up long enough to hear something. And, and they said, get a sponsor. And so I got a sponsor. And then, and he had a nice car and he seemed to dress well. So figured he must have it together. So, I got this guy as a sponsor. And he told me I worked the first step when I walked in the door, Then after about 45 days, I started noticing he was spending more time at the racetrack than in AA meetings. And after 9 years of sobriety, he still hadn't bothered to go get his license back. So I was figuring maybe this isn't the guy for me. And I changed sponsors. And the next sponsor told me, well, you worked the first 3 steps when you walked in the door. So I'm progressing through this thing pretty nicely by now, right? So, I'm sitting here and I'm going to these meetings and I'm not getting any better. They're telling me get commitment, so I take a commitment. I would always take the coffee commitment because I could sit in the back and nobody ever called on you. I could hide behind the urn back here and, and nobody would ever call on you. So the pot would go up. I'd just make sure that thing stayed filled and I didn't have to participate. And I would go to these meetings and, I went to the meetings and I hated going to the meetings, but it sure beat sitting at home alone with myself. That even sucked more, Because my head alone, I would pace. Even after I left the meetings, it was like I'd go home and pace back and forth and chain smoke cigarettes till 12:30 in the morning, and I couldn't sleep. And and I would just sit there and I'd be sweating, and I'd sit in the meetings and my hands would be shaking, and I'd go man, I got to cut this coffee out, And this was happening, and this was going on and all this kind of stuff. And after about 10 months, I hit rock bottom in sobriety. 10 months from a drink, and I was going absolutely nuts. And, I asked somebody, and it was my wife, and she was a friend at the time, and she said, I don't know. I said, I can't seem to find somebody to take me through these steps. I seem to be going nuts. I'm not happy. If I don't want to feel like this. And she said, pray about it. And I don't know why I heard it that time, but I went in the other room, I got on my knees, and I said, God help me, because I can't just keep going on like this. Within about 3 days, I found myself at this meeting. It was a step study meeting, and I met a man there. And it was a kind of I'm running out of time, but I want to talk about this a little bit. It was a step study meeting where we talk about the steps as they're outlined in the big book. And the format of the meeting is, you talk about the step being discussed that night. If you haven't worked that step, then talk about the step you're now on. If you haven't worked any of the steps, we invite you to listen. So it's going around the room, and they're talking about step 8, and it comes up to me, and they say, so where are you at? And I'm like, well, I'm in step 4. Well, what were your instructions? Well, maybe I'm still in this step 3. I'm turning my wheel. I'm not sure. Okay, so what were your instructions for step 3? Well, I'm having trouble with this whole God concept thing. And they finally just said, thanks for sharing, Mike. And, somebody said, you need to ask Pat to sponsor you. And what happened was I met with this man, and he was the first man to ever tell me the truth. He didn't tell me this too shall pass. Just keep coming back. He said, no, you're going to die. You're an alcoholic, and you're going to die. I was like, and that kind of sucked to hear that, but it rang true because he knew, I was miserable. And he said, unless you have an entire psychic change, eventually you're gonna drink again. That's what this message is about. If you don't have that spiritual experience, you will drink again. And he said, and I don't know how to take anybody through this work than to start at the beginning of this book and go through it with you page by page as I was taken through it. And we started on this path. And I got to tell you, the experience I had in doing that one-on-one, one alcoholic working with another, has completely been a life-changing experience and a completely mind-altering experience. The same values and principles that I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous with are completely gone, And I have a whole new set of principles that I live by today, I have a power greater than myself that I talk to on a regular basis, And my life has gotten infinitely better since I've been in this program. Something somebody said to me early on, is that if you want the promises that are outlined in this book, and there's lots of promises, wasn't just the 9th step promises. He pointed out promises to me in the 1st step, and in the 2nd step, and in the 3rd step. And he said, if you want the promises outlined in this book, you got to do what's in this book. Otherwise, you could do something else and get an entirely different set of promises. But if you want these promises, do what's in this book, and that made sense, Since then, I have never had to feel like that that day when I was hitting rock bottom, further from a drink than I had been in almost 12 years. My life has gotten infinitely better. And I'm running out of time, and thank you very much, and have a great day.
Now let's welcome our main speaker for tonight, Naomi.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Naomi, and I am an alcoholic. I'd like to thank Ramona for asking me to come and speak tonight, and congratulate the CHIP people, and wish Kristen a happy first-year birthday. To tell you a little bit about me, my sobriety date is April 4th, 1992. My home group is 52 from the Big Blue, and we meet in Palos Verdes on Tuesday night, 7:30. And I have a sponsor who has a sponsor, and I have completed all 12 steps. In Alcoholics Anonymous, we tell our stories in a general way, what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like today. And I'm going to attempt to do that. I may jump around a little bit, so just bear with me, please. I was born in a little small town in Beaumont, Texas, and I come from a really, really good, solid family. I was not abused as a child. I grew up having enough. My parents weren't wealthy by no means. They were both working people. My father owned a poultry business. He sold chickens and turkeys and eggs and stuff like that, and he had a candy counter in front of his store. And my mother operated a little cafe of her own. My mother was an excellent cook. Like I said, I had a pretty normal childhood until my brother got out of the military. I have a brother and a sister they're like 22 years older than I am. And I remember when my brother got out of the military, him and his wife moved in with us. He had 2 children, and my sister-in-law was very beautiful in my eyes. Part of the country where I'm from, there's a lot of beautiful people. There's a lot of Creole people, a lot of mixed people. And my sister-in-law, in my eyes, like I said, was very beautiful. And being in this household, I just looked at myself as being a real scrawny, little funny-looking kid. I had really big eyes. I was real skinny and kind of awkward. And I can remember looking at my sister-in-law. She had very fair skin, and she had beautiful hair. And my niece and my nephew looked just like her. And I remember growing up looking at her, with me being dark-skinned, looking at her and her children. I always looked at them, and I wanted to look like they did. I just thought that, if my skin was lighter and my hair was straighter, maybe I wouldn't feel so awkward, And I couldn't have been no more than 5 or 6 years old. I had all these feelings, and it was a kind of thing where I didn't have verbiage for it at that time. I didn't know how to talk about that. I just always remember being real shy and very, very much turned inward. Always thinking, looking at people and wondering what they were thinking. And of course, they were always thinking about me, And I remember being a small kid, growing up outside, we'd play outside in the sun. And in Texas, it can get like 110 outside midday. And I remember my sister-in-law would come out and she'd call us in the house. And, she says, "Oh, you kids come out of the sun, it's too hot out there." But what I heard her say was, "You guys come in, I don't want you to get burned and get dark and look like Naomi. That's what I thought she meant by calling us in out of the sun. You know, everything that I ever thought about myself as a child was always, if I were you, or if I looked like that, or it was always if only. You know, I was never ever comfortable in my own skin. You know, my parents split up when I was real young, and my mother moved out here to California, which I hated because I was so different. I had this thick Southern accent, very, very introverted, like I said. I didn't make friends very easily. I just remember feeling really uncomfortable in elementary and junior high and high school even. I did pretty good in school. You know, I managed to make the honor roll. I was even class vice president of my high school. So I did okay in school. But I always wanted to fit in, and it's like the girls or the kids that I was drawn to in school were always the hip, slick, and cool crowd. And I can tell you right now, you know, I was not hip, slick, and cool when I was growing up. My mother was not having any of that, you know. I was not allowed to wear makeup. I couldn't wear the mini skirts and all that. So I learned how to look one way when I left home, and then when I got out there with my crowd, I knew how to roll my skirt up and put my makeup on and do all that, tease my hair. But when I got home, I had to take that uniform off and go back to what I knew was acceptable in my house. I remember I did school one day with some girls, and you know, and I'm the kind of person, it's like when you're talking to me, I'm not even listening to you because I'm thinking. And they would tell jokes and, you know, would hang out, and we did school this one particular time, and they were talking all the slang talk. And I didn't understand any of that. And I'm asking my girlfriend to explain to me, what are they talking about? I was such a downer on the party, they sent me back to school. You know, and it was like all my life, you know, I've always wanted to fit in with the crowd. Like I said, there wasn't any drinking going on in my house. My mother used to fake drinking, you know, she would have parties and stuff, and she'd actually pour the alcohol out, put water in her glass, and then pour in 7-Up or orange juice and make everybody think she was drinking. And I don't ever remember seeing my father drink. But when we moved out here to California, you know, we'd have parties and all that, and I'd see people, you know, drinking and having fun with that, and, you know, I just always just felt so uncomfortable. I didn't start drinking until I was about 16 years old. I had gotten a summer job with a friend, and we had worked for this construction company, and what we would do after work, she would make drinks for the owners of this business. And I would ride back and forth to work with her because she had a driver's license. And anyway, long story short, she'd make these drinks, and she'd have drinks with them. And we were 16-year-old girls. And I would sit back on the sideline, and they would tell dirty jokes, and she was very social, and she would mix with them, and they'd have a good time. And I'd kind of sit on the side and watch them, and, you know, and I'd drink 7-Up, and I'd drink their orange juice. And one afternoon they said, you know, Naomi, you sit here every evening and you drink up all of our orange juice and you drink up all the chase. You know, you need to start putting something in that. You need to start getting with it. So I thought that was a pretty good idea. So she poured some Tanqueray gin in my orange juice, and, you know, I remember not really liking the taste. But for the first time, I felt that ease and comfort, you know. I just felt that I could finally relax. You know, when they told jokes, I actually got them. You know, and not 2 days later, I got the jokes, like right then, you know. And you know, alcohol worked for me for a lot of years, you know. I didn't immediately become alcoholic. Alcohol was the social lubricant that I needed to be social with people. It allowed me to go to dances. It allowed me to have friendships and go to house parties and card parties. I had a lot of fun with booze, you know. But what started to happen for me was I started drinking so much, I started passing out real early. You know, I started drinking where I'm getting ready for the party, and I'd get so drunk, I wouldn't even make the party. You know, I need to tell you that I've been married a few times in my life with this whole drinking thing, and it got to the point, like in my early 20s, I had met this real nice guy, and, you know, he was from England, and he gave me a choice. He said, you know, Moore, you either have to choose me or give up the alcohol, and, you know, you don't give an alcoholic of my type a choice, you know, and I chose the booze, and my life continued to spiral down from there, you know. Like I said, I had started to use alcohol as a social lubricant, but I started passing out way too early. So someone Matter of fact, it was a guy that used to do my hair. He introduced me to that other stuff, you know. Drugs are a part of my story. And the only reason why I started doing those lines was I could drink, and I could stay awake, and I could go to parties, and I could do my thing, and I could dance, and I was free. I had a good time. And, you know, it just got to be where this drug thing was starting to be a problem for me. So I remember, you know, I drank up another marriage, and, you know, I said, you know, I like jazz, I like going to the clubs and listening to music, and, you know, I don't really have a date. And I had read this article in Cosmo magazine where it told you how to go out, how it told you how being a single woman, how you go to a club and you didn't have to worry about guys picking up on you. Because I was taught you don't pick up guys in bars, you know. So I studied this article, and what I did was I read it and I followed the instructions in the article. It said to, you know, you get to the bar early and you introduce yourself to the waitress and you order 2 drinks. And you set the drink across from you and you have your drink and you drink it slowly and you sit there and you can enjoy your evening. And if guys that were on the lookout for a girl, if they saw you, they'd see the other drink there and they would think that, you know, that you're waiting for your date. It worked perfectly. But I said, well, you know, I got to drink, because I drink really fast. So I needed to order something that was big, you know, because I didn't want to keep ordering stuff. So I'd ordered these Long Island iced teas. And I had never drank Long Island iced tea. I didn't know. So I had this Long Island iced tea, and I tasted this drink, and it was like, man, this is really a good drink. It was expensive, but it was good. And I drank it down just like I would drink down anything else, you know. And I had about 2 of those, and, you know, the club's kind of packed now, and I had to go to the bathroom. And I'm thinking, oh my God, let me go to the bathroom. And the club's really packed, like I said, and I was sitting like right in front, right where the band was. And I had on this dress. It was strapless, and it kind of like, you know, with the halter top here, and it had tiers and tiers and tiers of ruffles. So I go to the bathroom, make it to the bathroom, and I do what I have to do, and, you know, I'm trying to pull my pantyhose up, and these Long Island iced teas both hit me at the same time. And I'm in this stall, and I can't figure out how to get out. And it's hot, it's really hot in there, and I don't know if I want to throw up or crawl out or what. So I just kind of stood there against the wall in this stall, and there's like paper all over the floor, and I mean, you know what these restrooms look like in bars, ladies? And I'm in there, and I'm like, oh my God, I got to get out of here. So I managed to kind of get myself together, so I thought. So I'm walking out of the restroom, and I hear giggling behind me. And I'm real self-conscious. You know, you don't giggle and not let me know what's going on. And I couldn't figure out, I'm like, oh my God, they're probably laughing at me, but I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. So when I sat down in the vinyl chair, I knew what they were laughing at. I had managed to get all my ruffles together in the front, but all the backside was tucked down in my pantyhose. And I had toilet paper all over my shoes. You know, so needless to say, I never tried that again, you know. My drinking pretty much after that point became confined to my bedroom. Like I said, I'm a real self-conscious kind of person, and what people think of me is real important, you know. And what started happening for me was when I was about in my late 30s, I guess about 35, I started making trips to the hospital. And I would go through these drinking bouts, and I would start hemorrhaging. And what happened is they hospitalized me at one point in my life. I was hospitalized 9 times in a 2-year period. You know, I started this hemorrhaging, and I'd have to go into the hospital for 7 to 9 days, and they would transfuse me and give me all the life fluids, and I would lay there and I'd make promises, you know, that something in my life has to change, you know. And this wonderful doctor that I had would ask me, he said, you know, Naomi, we can't understand why you start hemorrhaging like this. Because see, when I drink and when I do that other stuff, you know, I do not eat. You know, I will drink fluids, but I will not eat food. And I started hemorrhaging on the inside, and this doctor would sit on my bedside and said, you know, Naomi, you're so young and we can't understand why you're going through these bouts with this hemorrhaging. At one point, they were talking about taking out my colon and giving me a colostomy bag. And, you know, I would lie to this doctor. See, my M.O. is to go get my hair done once a week, go get my nails done, you know, put on a lot of makeup. I make sure that the outside looks good. You know, steal credit cards, steal my mother's credit cards to go buy clothes for myself and my children. So the outside stay together so you won't know. And I went to great lengths to hide. It got to the point where I actually, I had this disease had such a hold on me. I remember I was in the hospital one particular time, and I had one of the guys that I used to buy drugs from. He actually came to the hospital and brought me some stuff, you know, in the hospital. You know, I'm hooked up to an IV, and I'm in the bathroom doing this stuff, and the nurses came out to check my vitals, and they couldn't figure out why my vitals were off the chart. You know, like I said, I look real good on the outside, and I'm a real good liar, like we all are, you know. And I'll even cry to convince you that I'm not doing any of that stuff, you know. I'm not doing any of that stuff. You just don't understand, you know. When are you drinking? Of course, I have a glass of wine with dinner, you know. But that's it, you know. I don't have a problem, and I could not admit to anybody what I was doing. And you know, the book talks about living the double life. That was my life. I was in therapy for a lot of years, and I could not get honest with the therapist. Here I was paying this doctor. I had to go once a week, and I was still lying to him. This disease almost took my life, like I said. This went on for a few more years. I actually got sober when I was 38 years old. I had been on another run. You know, the paramedics used to come to my house so regularly, they knew my first name, you know. One of the last trips to the hospital, I did not have a pulse. I had hemorrhaged so long and so profusely, they had my daughters call my name. And they said they couldn't get a reading on me. And I just remember seeing this bright light and just going into nothingness, and everything was all right. You know, and then I can vaguely remember my daughters calling me. And then everything came back, you know, the bright lights and the paramedics running around and doing what they do. Needless to say, I had to go to the hospital a couple more times after that. And what finally happened to me when I hit my bottom, I had been coming to meetings in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous because I had a girlfriend that when I was 16, that I used to blame started me drinking. She got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I was angry with her for a lot of years. I used to say it's all her fault that my life turned out this way. She got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I used to go to meetings with her, and I couldn't get it. I couldn't hear it. I would sit here and I would compare my insides to your outsides, and I hear people talking about going to jail and losing their kids and losing their jobs and losing their places to stay and losing cars, and any of that stuff had happened to me. I still had a job. I still had a car. I still had custody of my children. You know, sure, I had drank up a few marriages, but so what? Everybody gets divorced, you know. I had rationalization and justification for everything, and nothing was my fault. It was just that I had just been dealt a dirty hand, you know. But like I said, finally one morning, I woke and I just said, you know, I can't do this anymore. I had been up all night drinking and using, and I could not shut my head off. I could not stop the insanity in my head. And it was like the more I drank and the more I did, I just got more and more sober. And what happened was I called this counselor that I had talked to. I had gotten his card through an EAP person on my job. And I called him, and he got me into Kaiser's outpatient program, and that's where recovery really began for me. And they taught me all about this disease there. It was a lot of structure there. And like my husband talked about, you know, I had a lot of issues with my mother, and we did some empty chair stuff. I had issues with my father because he died when I was 10 years old, and I just thought that life just treated me so unfairly, you know. Why do I have to work so hard, and, you know, poor me and all of that. So I dealt with a lot of that in that outpatient program, but they directed me to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they told me to get a sponsor. And, you know, I did what they said for the first 3 weeks. And, things went well for the first 3 weeks. Everything they said, I did. And after about 3 weeks, I just thought, these people are trying to just take over my life. And, I really don't need anybody telling me where I can hang out. And they want me to change my friends. And they don't understand, these are good people. They're all drug addicts and dope dealers and all that kind of stuff. But I love them. Those were my people. So after about 3 weeks, like I said, I went by this guy's house who I used to buy drugs from. And, he said, Naomi, you really look good and everything. I'm so proud of you, blah, 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 all of that. And I'd watched him do his thing, selling out of his back door and all of that. And the obsession wasn't on me. I went home about 2 o'clock that afternoon, and I was sitting in my dining room, in my dining room in my apartment, and I was rolling my hair. And I could smell his cologne on my clothing. And this obsession hit me. It's like it was on me. And I'm like, oh my God, I just had to have one. So what I proceeded to do was I went back down to his house, and I was banging on his window to let me in and to just sell me just one. And he said, Naomi, you've been doing so well. I don't want to see you go out like that. So I went home and I just started going through my personal items, and I found all these pager numbers. They had pagers back then. And I paged all these people, and I need to tell you that there was a riot going on. I was living in the Crenshaw area, and there was a riot going on, and there was a curfew. You couldn't be out of your house after 10 o'clock. And I couldn't get anybody to bring me anything, but I kept trying and trying and trying. And I finally found this one guy. He says, I won't come to your house, but if you meet me around the corner, I'll meet you over there. And I said, fine. So I got in my car, and before I walked out of my door, I started remembering the things and some of the cliches and all that, and seeing the faces of people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I thought, man, what if I go to jail tonight? What if I get busted? And see, jail has always been a huge fear of mine, because if I go to jail, I'll lose everything. I lose my job, I lose my kids, I lose everything. Because my job checks. They check on stuff like that. But I had to go. That obsession was on me. And I went to the appointed place, and the guy was there. And we did the transaction and all that. And seemed like right after we did that transaction, because there was nobody on the street when I left my apartment. The streets were deserted. And when I got to the appointed place and we did this transaction, it was like half of LAPD surrounded my car. And all I remember seeing was this bright light. And I got out of the car. The police were just running around. They had the guy on the ground. They pulled me out of the car, and they had me to assume the position. And I'm standing there, and I'm totally demoralized because I'd never assumed the position before. And I'm standing in the middle of the street. There's total chaos going on around me. And all I remember seeing is this bright light. And I'm focusing in on that bright light, and I'm seeing the faces of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And they're tearing my car apart, and I had put the drugs in my sweatshirt, and the guy had thrown the money back in my car, and the cops were searching me, and just total chaos. And I'm standing there, and in the midst of all this insanity, I have this sense of peace and ease. And I'm thinking, God is doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. I remember you guys had said that. And for the first time, it was okay to get busted. It was okay to go to jail. And I was actually grateful that these police had intervened on this because I was out of control. I had to have just one. I had to have another one. And like I said, they're going around, so the cop takes me to the back of his police car, and he's just bombarding me with all these questions. He's talking to me. I could just see his mouth moving, and I'm just standing there just looking at this light. And his mouth is moving, and I can't hear him because my ears are ringing. And he's asking me all these questions, and he's asking, and what comes out of my mouth was, I've been sober for 3 weeks. I'm in Kaiser's outpatient program. I have no idea why I said that. No idea whatsoever. And he says, don't you have a sponsor? I could hear. He says, don't you have a sponsor? I said, I have a sponsor, but she's out of town. I swear to God, this happened. I said, she's out of town. And she was out of town. He says, well, don't you have phone numbers? I said, yeah, I have phone numbers, but I don't call those people. I don't know those people. And he started talking to me again, and I could not hear him again. And we went on, and I'm just standing here thinking, I said, I got to get out of here. And it was, like I said, it was okay to go to jail. I just wanted to get out of there. And I said, why are you asking me all these questions? Are you some kind of social worker cop? And he went into his pocket and he pulled out a medallion with the triangle on it. And he 12-stepped me right there on the street, and he told me parts of his story. And to show you how God worked this thing in my life to free me to tell this story, because I thought, nobody's going to ever believe me. This cop later on agreed to be a speaker at a speaker meeting that I attended regularly. I invited him to be the 40-minute speaker, and he agreed to do it. And it was a lot of people at that meeting, and that's him telling his story and validating what had happened that night freed me to tell this story. And I tell you, man, it's like, you know, because at that point I had worked the steps up to the 3rd step, but I didn't believe in these steps. I just thought, you know, these steps might work for you. Because, see, I've tried Buddhism, I was born and raised Baptist, I've tried the Catholic thing, I've tried the Buddhist thing, I've tried several religions, I've read religious books, I've watched TBN, I've done it all, you know. I've read inspirational books, all of that. The more exercising, physical fitness, I did all of that trying to find that nugget, that one line that's gonna awaken me. And it just never happened. So what happened after that was, you know, I changed sponsors, because what had happened was she wanted to take me through the steps with a group of other ladies, and she wanted us to form this bond. But I had no interest in trying to bond with the women in Alcoholics Anonymous, because, I mean, I was still too sick, and I didn't want to do it as in a group. I needed one-on-one. And what happened, I met a man in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got married in my first year. I did that, and hadn't worked all the steps. I kind of, you know, found a sponsor to kind of let me work the steps the way I wanted to work them, and, you know, we looked at step 9, and I wanted to buy a house, and cleaned up my credit, and got the house, and, you know, everything was okay for about 2 years, and slowly but surely, man, everything started to fall apart, and just when I was coming up on about 5 years sober, I was wanting to take my own life. My job made it mandatory for me to see a therapist 3 times a week. It was mandatory if I was going to stay employed. I had to see, first it was a psychologist, and then they said, no, you need a psychiatrist. So I had to see this doctor 3 times a week, and she wanted to put me on antidepressants, and because I could not. On page 52 in the big book, it talks about the bedevilments. And I was at a meeting one night, and actually Mike and I were roommates then, and he had started going to meetings, different meetings on the Hill. And he started coming home, and I mean, we were just friends, platonic friends, and I mean, I was not even attracted to him. Mike was safe. He was my friend. Just to go to show you how God has worked in our lives, in my life in particular, he started getting better. Because he was sick and I was sick. He was, you know, moping around, and that night that he came and asked me, Naomi, what should I do? I didn't know what to tell him. I had never worked all the steps either. I said, you need to pray about it. Well, what started happening, he started going to these meetings. And he got with this sponsor that was taking him through the steps, and they were doing all this stuff, and he was coming home showing me this stuff in the book. And of course, at first I got a little resentful because I had more time than him. And it's like he was showing me things that I had never seen. I had read the big book, I can't tell you how many times, drunk and sober. I mean, I can read. So, I mean, long story short, I got so miserable, you know, he kept inviting me to go to these meetings, and I finally went one night, and this group that we belong to, I mean, they're very structured. I had never been to a structured meeting. I started sharing because, like I said, these topics are focused, and they called on me to share, and I started talking about my life. And they cross-talked me. I didn't know that I should have got up and walked out, because I should have been insulted because they hurt my feelings. But I was so sick, I just sat there. And at the break, Ramona's friend Herb came and talked to me, and he showed me page 52 in the big book, where it talks about the bedevilments, being a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't control our emotional nature. Couldn't seem to be of real use to anybody, you know? I'm paraphrasing, because I had been sober, like I said, almost 5 years, and I wasn't sponsoring anybody. You know, I couldn't transmit anything because I didn't have anything, you know. And when Herb showed me that, he put me together with a woman who he had taken through this step work. And that's really where my recovery began for me. We started on the blank page. You know, where she started me in the book, there was nothing on there. We had to draw the circle and the triangle. To go back a little bit about how this page 52 came into so important to me. Like I said, I was seeing this therapist, and she kept pushing the antidepressants. Now, I have no opinion on antidepressants. I can only share my own experience. And I kept telling this doctor, I said, I don't believe that God has me in this place for naught. You know, I don't want to be medicated. I believe I need to feel everything that I'm feeling right now, because that's just the way that's the way I believe. I just don't believe God has dropped me here for naught. And you know what? I'm here to tell you tonight, I did not take the antidepressants. I went through these steps. Like I said, we started on a blank page, and she proceeded to take me through the book. And I had such a powerful third step, first, second, and third, fourth, fifth step experience. I was rocketed, like the book talks about. I was rocketed into another dimension. You know, I have been able to do things in my life that a person like me just don't do. See, you don't understand. You don't know how self-centered I am. You don't know how selfish I am. I used to sit in those meetings and say, I have no desire to work with others. Today, working with others is one of the... I used to sit, and I really didn't care what they thought. And something happened to me when I went through this step work. Mike was talking about the psychic change. That happened for me. You know, one of my joys, the greatest joy in my life is to work with the women that I work with. I mean, we have a wonderful time. You know, I do things today that a person like me just would never do. I don't get up on podiums and talk to people that I don't know. I don't get up on podiums and talk to people that I know. If you knew how self-centered I am, you know, if you knew how turned inward I was. But what I've been given here in this program, I've been given a gift that is so precious to me. You know, I have an understanding with a God that is so awesome until I just cannot believe my life today. My life hasn't changed a whole lot on the outside, but I have relationships with people that, you know, I just never thought I would have. You know, I have a relationship with my family. You know, I have a husband who I truly respect. You know, I don't live my life for other people anymore. You know, my whole life in my younger years, especially when I was out there drinking, you know, I always wanted to live my life in a way that I thought you would approve of. You know, I don't have to live that way today. You know, I live my life by spiritual principles. I'm not saying that I do that perfectly, by no means. So I ended up having to make amends to my niece Saturday. You know, she's in Texas, and she's supposed to be caring for my other niece, who just underwent breast cancer surgery, and she just got out of her program, and she's, you know, it's like, what the hell are you doing? You know, you run around trying to find a job and all this kind of stuff. Your sister needs you there. Anyway, I told her gave her some pretty choice words that wasn't very spiritual. And, you know, I felt really bad about that, and I had to call her yesterday and make amends for that. You know, so I don't do this walk perfectly, but you know what? I do it a whole lot better than I used to, and my heart is in this today. You know, I love working with other people. There's something that I want to leave you with. I'm going to close a little bit early. You know, there's a quote by Martin Luther King that a friend of mine shared with me, and I hope I don't screw it up. Everyone has, how does it go? Everyone has the opportunity for fame. For fame is not determined by everyone has the opportunity for greatness, not fame, but greatness. For greatness is determined by service. When my friend emailed me that, I welled up and started tearing. It's because of who I am. That quote means so much to me. You know, like I said, I'm not your typical person who you see people who just love giving and your Mother Teresa types. And I guess the reason why I'm stressing this so much is that these steps changed my life. They changed who I am. You know, I love doing this. And Stacy, I want to thank you for coming along with us. Stacy's one of the friends that I get to walk this walk with in sobriety. You know, I love the people in these rooms. I love this group. I mean, you guys made us feel so welcome when we came here. And with that, I'm going to sit down now. Thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. And if that shows up, the gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.